Hey guys, over the last week into this week, talking about what I'm talking to you guys about, I'm calling vertical points of passion because you need to understand what is all this about. So whether you've been here for a long time or you're brand new today, let me make it really, really simple. Why? What is all this? A vertical church. Vertical church, listen to me, is a church that is dedicated to taking the life-giving message of Jesus to all people, that they can become followers of him. You see, following Jesus, we want to provide an opportunity for his life to be replicated in others. And so this is a part of a journey. And people look at me and say, well, Pastor Ken, oh my goodness, the name changed. What else is going to change? And calm down, guys. Listen, it's a culmination. Because if you've been here long enough, you realize we've been changing. The name change is really who we become. It's walking into the destiny of what God is. It's a culmination. It's all of this that we've been on the journey of culminates in this reality. It's our identity in what? Because when I became senior leader here, two things that were concerned to me. The two commands of Jesus that he left on the earth that we would be true to. That we would absolutely evaluate ourselves based on these ends. Jesus gave us a great commandment. He said what? When asked, what did God require of humanity? What is the greatest of all commands? What's God's design for humanity? Jesus answered that in this term. He said, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. And he said the next is likened unto it, to love your neighbor as yourself. If you do that, you have fulfilled all the will of God. You have achieved God's purpose and plan. And then the other one is this, the Great Commission. Whether you read it out of Mark's Gospel where he said, go into all the world and make Jesus known to all people, or whether you read it out of Matthew's Gospel where he said, go and make disciples, followers of Jesus in every nation, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and command them to do everything I have taught you, for lo, I am with you always. And what is it that Jesus wanted us to teach people? What did he command us to do? To love one another. To love others, to love God and to love others. Because you know what? The Great Commandment is the motivation for the Great Commission. And love is the most unselfish world that you can live in. If you want to break the back of sin in any human life, it's only broken in one fashion. When you learn to love God and others before you love yourself. In that essence, that's what it's about. It's a community of people that understand, what does love look like? What is all of this about? Because listen, if you're taking notes this morning, at Vertical Church, we aspire to create a culture of generosity. At Vertical Church, we aspire to create a culture of generosity. Why? Because love is the most life-giving reality there is. God so loved the world that he did what? He gave his one and only Son. Life came to us because love gave to us. In fact, Jesus said, and that's what's important that you must understand. When we talk about a community of love, it's not our own speculation of what love means to us. But Jesus said, as I have loved you, you are to love one another. Again, it's not subjective. It's how he loved us is how we should be. And he said, by this, would all people know we're his followers? By the love we have one to another. And so when our hearts are filled with the love of God, how can you not care about the people that God sent his Son to die for? How could you not care about it? Because you know why? Once we were one of those people. That someone had to step out of their comfort zone and share with us the good news of what Jesus had accomplished, what Jesus had done, how much God had loved us. And because of that, our lives came to the knowledge that God was for us and we could become his children. That should never leave us. That should never go away from us. If love is at the motivation, if it's at the heartbeat of all that it's motivating us to do, then the Great Commission is fulfilled through the generosity of people willing to give their lives, to give themselves to doing it. In fact, for us to fulfill all that we're called to do, I shared with you last week about this end. In walking into the senior leadership of our church, I realized there were things in my heart. That's why when I asked the question to Rick Renner, and he said to me, one man lays a foundation, another builds thereon. That may truly be the future. There are things that I've talked to you about before that I know is our destiny to do. I know them more now, more clearly than ever before. As I've talked to you about it, I know that we're to help bring to pass the New Haven Dream Center. In other words, a place that reaches out to meet the needs of people, to heal their hurts, and to solve the problems of those marginalized, those left devastated because of sin, and especially dealing with inner city realities that seem to trap human lives. That's a part of our calling. It's a part of our mission. Another thing that I've talked to you about before is that I know it is our destiny to create a ministry training center, but listen, not in the capacity of a typical Bible school. For what? Because I've watched over the years that people who attend Bible schools learn a lot of biblical information, but sometimes have trouble translating it into actual true ministry. They begin to know everything and do nothing. And the fact is, I wanted to train people to absolutely know what it means to heal the hurts of others, to care about people like Christ cared about them, and raise up people not just for our church, but for this whole region, to serve the needs of God's purpose in this region. And that's one of our testimonies. Because you can't embody the life of Jesus and live for yourself. Jesus came and gave himself for others. And also one of the things that I've been actually presently working on through a strategic partnership, which is a global mission strategy where our church would work in direct partnership with a major missions organization, because I believe as much as it is important for us to minister to our community and to the areas around it, which we had almost forgotten about in some ways. But one I've worked so hard to bring back to our realization that this is our responsibility, but I don't believe it ends there. I believe that needs around the world, because why? People everywhere across this planet are precious to God, and in every way that God empowers us. That's what our vision, that's what our mission is all about. See, life is expressed through love, and love is the most giving reality. Therefore, being a culture where we live to give is what a vertical church is about. It's about giving an understanding that we are here not for us, but for God's purpose. A vertical church is a God-centered church that's about loving God and serving others. It is embodied in that, and that's why for us, our vision became so clear that we recognized success was not about the number of people who attend the church. Success was not about the money that came in. Success for us was about moving people from where they are to where God wanted them to be. That all of our vision culminated. We have our weekend celebrations that inspire our love for God, but it goes far deeper than that. We may learn about God, we may understand about God, but God has so much more for us. We have small groups to develop life-giving relationships, but our growth track helps people discover what it was God created them to do, because here's our success point. We want to empower people through our dream team to fulfill God's purpose. Therefore, success for us, if you're taking notes, listen. Success for us is empowering people to serve the needs of others. You see, Jesus' life came to serve the needs of others. And if we are to replicate the life of Jesus Christ, then it is fulfilled in our ability to meet the needs of others, to give our lives unselfishly, sacrificially sometimes, not when it's convenient, not just when I feel like it, but because God is living in me, my maturity walks itself out in the ability that I have to serve the needs of others. And so that leads me to something so important that I want to talk to us about this morning. Because one word that many people have used to describe the generation that we live in right now, probably more than any other thing, is the word entitled. Now, they generally look at it between the ages of 18 and 30. They call it an entitlement generation. And if you're a parent here, it goes, wow, okay, that's why I get it. Why my kids always want the best and the newest, the shiniest, and it doesn't matter how much I make or anything. But listen to me. I don't think that it's about young people only. Truthfully, I think that the entire culture that we live in right now, this generation that is living in this planet, or on this nation especially, can be entitled an entitlement generation. Now let me help you with this end, because I could give you a definition for entitlement, but I don't know if that would really help. Let me illustrate it for you what I'm talking about, okay? How many of you have ever taken your kids to an Easter egg hunt? Anybody ever done that, okay? When we had Easter egg hunts here years ago, it was always amazing. Kath and I'd bring our kids, and here are all these kids, hundreds of kids that would come for an Easter egg hunt. And all these kids would line up, and these eggs were strewn across. We did them with plastic ones with candy in the middle. And as all these kids are waiting for the horn to go off or the bell to go or all the rest, the parents of the little kids, because usually you find big kids, medium-sized kids, and little kids, and all the parents of the little kids are looking at all the big kids and getting really nervous about that. Then when the whistle blows and all of a sudden all the kids go racing out and the big kids are pushing everybody out and stuffing their bags with as much Easter eggs or candied Easter eggs that they can get, and they're filling their bags, and the medium-sized kids are trying to get something. The little kids are there just, crying because they ain't got no eggs. And when you see one of those little kids, they find an egg and they're just about to go reach for it, and some medium-sized kids come, bang, knocks them and grabs the egg. And all of that, when it's over, all the big kids, they got 12 pounds of candy in their sack. And they feel so entitled. I've worked hard for this. I got these Easter eggs. This is my right. And all the parents of the little kids, they're crying and they're going to the people in charge going, my kid deserves Easter eggs. It's not right. We waited in line. We paid. We're members of this church. Come on. Everybody deserves Easter eggs. And you know what all that is? That's entitlement wars. That's entitlement wars. Well, maybe that doesn't resonate with you. Maybe you don't understand that one. So let me give it to you this way. Anybody ever go shopping on Black Friday? Anybody ever go? I'm one of those nuts that got up couple years I did this, and one year it was absolutely eye-opening for me because they were having this special sale at Walmart. And I'm like, wow, hon, look, we could get the kids. This is what they wanted for Christmas. They were little, and, the leap pads were out and all the rest. And I'm like, wow, look at the price. This is great. I'm going to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm going to get there early, and I'm going to get in. And lo and behold, I get up at 4. I get down to Walmart at 4:30 in the morning, and I go to the one in Stratford. And here, when I pull into the parking lot's full. The line in front of Walmart is all the way down and all the way past Home Depot. And I'm going, oh my goodness, you gotta be kidding me. And so I stand in this line. There are police there. There's fire people there. And they open the door and people are shoving and pushing and moving. It's kind of like on Black Friday, they have this advertisement at Macy's. And they're going to have these coats that are there, and there's 600 women pressed up against the glass, waiting to get one of these coats, and they have only 24 in there. And they open up the door, and all these women are beating each other up, pushing each other out of the way. And those that grab the coats, they feel so good. They run up to the register. They're happy. They're entitled. They got up early. They deserve it. And all the other ladies that didn't get a coat, they go to the customer complaint center and say, listen, I got up early too. I deserve this price. I want a rain check. I waited in line just as much as anybody else, and all that. It's entitlement wars. Or like the guys, when they got that Black Friday deal at Best Buy, and they got a 55-inch flat screen TV for $395. And you got all these guys that are there waiting for the doors are open, and they only got 200 of them, and they're beating each other up, pushing each other out of the way, and all this just to get a TV. Those are entitlement wars. Because if you got one, you're entitled to it. You deserved it. You worked for it. You got it. It's yours. But if you didn't get one, you feel, I still deserve one. Everybody should have a shot at one. Now, if you're a Christian, if you're a churchgoer, if you're a follower of Christ, how do you think Jesus would deal with all this? How do you think Jesus would deal with all this? If Jesus showed up at Best Buy and dealing with all the guys fighting over the TV, or if Jesus showed up at Macy's and all the ladies are fighting over the coat, or even weirder than that, if Jesus showed up at an Easter egg hunt. Think about it. If Jesus showed up at an Easter egg hunt, he'd go, really? I die and rise from the dead, and this is the best you can come up with? And he's trying to straighten it out with everybody crying and feeling, I didn't get enough and my kid deserves this. And how would Jesus straighten all this out? I mean, would he go into Macy's and pull a Solomon on him and kind of cut the coat up and give everybody a piece? I mean, how would he handle the TV situation? Would he say, well, the first in line was to get it, the last in line was to get it, the one with the least amount of income was to get it, the oldest, the youngest? I mean, think about all this. Because in our culture, we are dealing with this. People say, how much of my money am I entitled to keep? Or they say, how much of my money is the government entitled to? You know what's amazing to me? Everybody loves services, but not a lot of people like to pay for them. And so we asked Jesus, can you help us straighten this out? And Jesus would show up and he would look at it and say, listen, he said, the question is not what you're entitled to. The question is, what are you going to do with what you're entitled to? And he said, well, Jesus, that doesn't help me. I mean, I want you to arbitrate this. I want you to figure it out. I want you to tell me what should be, what's fair, what people should get. And Jesus said, whoa, you guys figure all that out yourself. I mean, go have an election about it. You vote about it. You cast a ballot. You figure it out. You do a survey. You figure out some way. And when everybody's determined exactly what they're entitled to, then invite me into the conversation. Because here's the question I'm going to ask you. What are you going to do with what you've been entitled to? What are you going to do with what you've been entitled to? Christians, if we could figure this out, not only would it change us, it would change our community, it would change our country, and it has the power to change our world. Because if you want to know how the early church operated, you see, they took what they were entitled to and leveraged it to serve the needs of others. And so I want you to turn in your Bible this morning as we go through this. I want you to find the Gospel of John. The Gospel of John, chapter 13. John's Gospel, chapter 13. As you're turning there, let me set this up for you. Because if you read the Bible regularly, which I encourage you to do, you got to realize the four Gospels all tell the story of Jesus' life, and they tell different parts of some of the same events. And Jesus had dealt with this entitlement mentality in his own team. Yeah, the guys that were serving Jesus, some of them were serving for the wrong reasons. Because they figured he was going to be the king, they were going to get a job with authority, and they would be able to push other people around. They would have authority, they would be able to do what they wanted to do, and man, serving Jesus, that's why John and James took him aside and said, can we sit on your right and your left? But you see, multiple times during Jesus' ministry, it's almost embarrassing to tell, but I love the Bible because it's so honest and so real. You know, all these guys that became the founders of the church, the fact was the Bible told the dirt on them as well as the good. And during the time of serving Jesus, Jesus had dealt multiple times with this argument that had arisen. Who would be the greatest among them? Who would be in charge? Who would be large and in charge and the one given the responsibilities? And so all of this was something they had. Now, what we're going to look at tonight is that the night that Jesus was going to spend the last, what we call the Last Supper, he was going to celebrate the Passover meal with his team for the very last time. Last meal he would share with them, last opportunity while he was physically still on earth to impart to them, listen, this time what fascinates me as we're turning to John 13 is this. Luke's gospel tells this part of it. In Luke 22, it said, Jesus turned to all these guys as they were eating the Passover meal, and he said, one of you will betray me. And so they started to ask the question, is it you? Is it you? And they're asking each other, who's going to betray him? And then all of a sudden, this is so amazing when you read it, that Luke tells us that all of a sudden, they start asking each other, and then the argument comes around to who's the greatest. And the next thing you know, they're having an absolute bickering fight at the Passover meal is who's going to be the greatest. And Jesus finally chimes in and says, guys, listen. The kings and those in authority among the Gentiles exercise lordship or authority over the people. They're like, yeah, Jesus, we get it. That's why we're following you. You're going to be king and we're going to be in charge. And we wanted that. So yeah, we get it. We understand. He said, but not so with you. He said, he who is greatest among you will be the servant of all. He said, who's the greatest one sitting at the table tonight? But I didn't come to you to be served by you. I came to serve you. The Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. And so if you got all that, lock and load, because here's this. In John chapter 13, verse 1, let's read this together and look at this. This is so fascinating. It says this, in verse 1, it said, it was just before the Passover festival, Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave the world and go to the Father. In other words, Jesus knew his time of earthly ministry was coming to a close. And he was about to impart to these guys that he had trained all that he intended to accomplish after his departure. And he realized he had a feat on his hand. Because look at this next verse. It says, this next part of the verse, it says, and having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. Now, this is a very hard part to translate out of Greek. It's so fascinating to me. That's why the NIV 1984 version said he wanted to show them the full extent of his love. The Amplified Bible says it this way: he loved them to the end, to the greatest and highest extent. Because Jesus is about to reveal to us how true love truly operates. What is a loving community really supposed to look like? What is all this? Jesus recognizes his time is short, and he must leave a lasting impression upon these guys that he's about to give his entire ministry over to. And so, read along in verse 2, it says, and the evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. So Jesus also knew someone was eating with him who was going to betray him. One of his closest followers. All this is weighing on him. He knows he's heading to the cross, but he realizes he has a responsibility right now that he has to impart something that will last. So look at verse 3. This is so fascinating. It says, Jesus knew. Now, John writing this, the word knew means he was so he was in such realization, he understood. I don't think it's something he didn't ever know before. But now it was at the forefront of his thinking. This is something that he understood even with his physical senses. In fact, he was more conscious of this than any other thing. John says this, he said, Jesus knew. And what did he know? He knew that the Father had put all things under his power. Or some Bibles say authority. In other words, Jesus realized that he was the most powerful man in the room that night. In fact, he realized that he was not just the most powerful man in the room, he was the most powerful man in the city. In fact, he realized more than just the most powerful man in the city, he was the most powerful man in the country. In essence, he knew he was the most powerful man on the planet. In other words, Jesus realized that he was entitled by God to all authority. He was more entitled than any other person in that room. He knew that all things had been given under his authority, and he was about to return to his Father in heaven. And so, how is it that you act when you are entitled, when you know that you have authority? How is it Jesus this demonstrates something so fascinating to us, because when he knew more than any other time that he had lived on the planet, that he was more entitled than any other person, he turns. And this next word in verse 4, so critical, this next word, so. It's the hinge word. Jesus acts and demonstrates for his team how we are to act when we have and understand what we're entitled to. It says this, so he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing. See, his outer clothing was a representation of his calling. What his role was as their teacher, as the one who was in authority and their Lord. He took that off, and what does he do? It says, he took off his outer clothing and wrapped a towel around his waist. And after that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. In essence, what Jesus does right at this moment causes every single person who was in the room that night to absolutely stop. Every jaw hits the ground and they're all staring at him. Now, some people in the room are thinking, man, I should have took care of that. I should have planned on this. I should have made sure this was going on and this happened. Some of them were thinking, yeah, we should have hired people to come in, deal with this issue. Oh my goodness, we know at least one person in the room is thinking, no way, you're not going to wash my feet. And so Jesus goes about, the most powerful man in the room. He takes off his outer garment, all that represents his authority, his entitlement, and he lays it aside and wraps a towel around him and begins to wash the feet of his followers. And look at what happens next. It says, and he came to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? In other words, come on. No. No, Jesus, no, you're not going to do that for me. And Jesus, look what Jesus says to him. Jesus replied, you do not realize now what I'm doing, but later you will understand. In other words, no one in that room that night really got what he was doing. Because more than just serving the needs of others, more than this, more than just doing what nobody else wanted to do, what everybody else thought that they were above, that nobody else, this was too low for them. Because you got to remember, at this particular time, to all the disciples, all those that were following Jesus, they were kind of like rock stars. Because although people couldn't always get to Jesus, if they could just get to one of his disciples, Jesus had given them commission, and they had healed the sick. They had raised the dead. They had done all this stuff. And man, everywhere they went, they had notoriety, they had acclaim, because guess what? If you couldn't get to Jesus, all you need to get to is one of them. And so they had this status. So they figured, wash feet? What, are you kidding me? Don't you know who I am? I'm one of his followers. I mean, he may be the king, but at least, you know what? I'm going to sit on his right. That's for someone else to do. Jesus is saying, listen, far deeper, guys. Far deeper than just serving. Far deeper than just going out of your way to meet a need that no one else is willing to meet. He said, you won't understand the ramification of this till afterwards. And notice what he says next. Then, Lord, Simon replied, not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well. Isn't he amazing? I mean, always trying to, no, Lord, I'm on top. Not just my feet like the rest of these guys. Do all of me. I'm more committed. I'll die with you, Jesus. All right? And Jesus says to him, those who have had a bath need only to wash their feet. Their whole body is clean. And you are clean, though not every one of you. For he knew who was going to betray him. And that was why he said not everyone was clean. And when he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. And notice this, he asked them a question. He said, do you understand what I've done for you? And if they were honest to turn around and say, no, Jesus, we don't understand what you did. We usually don't. We usually never get it until you explain it to us. So he asked them, do you understand what I have done for you? Now that I am, notice he said, you call me, because he's about to explain it to him. He says, you call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. In other words, guys, you've called me teacher, and that's right, that's who I am. You've called me Lord, and I've never said, no, don't call me Lord. No, that's who I am. I am entitled to those. That's who I am to you. And I have never shrunk away from that. That's what I'm entitled to be called. That's who I am. But notice what he goes on to say. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have left you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. In other words, Jesus said, listen, guys, you have looked up to me. You have called me your teacher and your Lord. And that is true, because that is who I am. So now, if I, your teacher, and I, your Lord, will lay aside all that I'm entitled to serve you, then I am leaving for you the example of what I expect you to do, whatever you feel that you're entitled to. Whatever you think that you have the right to, I am expressing to you what it is my heart is that you would do. Because to be a follower of me, to emulate me, I have left you the example of what it means to be my follower. Because whatever you think you're entitled to, I want you to have this in your mind. I want you to understand how you are to act. And that is this: if I was willing to lay aside all that and do this for you, then I expect you to do this for one another. And he said, blessed are you, not if you teach this. Blessed are you, not if you preach this. Blessed are you, not if you exegete this, not if you celebrate this. He said, no, blessed are you if you do this. So in essence, to embody the life of Jesus, it is this that we come to the realization of: whatever we feel we're entitled to, that we leverage that for people less fortunate than ourselves. In other words, to live the life of Jesus is to understand that the level of the life of Christ measured in my life is not by the number of scriptures that I know. It is not by the knowledge that I have. It is not by my sense of superiority. It has everything to do with what I do, with what I've been given to leverage and serve the needs of others. You see, you and I must recognize this. If you're taking notes, listen. We display the life of Christ in giving our life to serve the needs of others. You see, guys, when we get a hold of this understanding, how are we to act? Because you know why? In the church world, people have opinions just like anybody else. And we've been dealing with all this, and we've been going through all this, and people, they've been here, and they got opinions about what we should be doing and where we should be going. And here's my point. Guys, it's really all about this: how much of the life of Christ is displayed in us by our willingness to serve the needs of others. When we stop about what I feel I'm entitled to, when we stop with what do I think I deserve and how should things be, it's about what am I doing to express the life of Jesus in the fashion in which I serve the needs of others. That's what it comes down to in this end, is that you and I recognize, and you know what? I'm excited because you know why? There's a bunch of people here in this church who do get it. There's a bunch of people here in this church that go out of their way week in and week out. There are people here in this church who give themselves every week to pray for this church, which is so important. We have people here every week because you know what? Here's entitlement wars. People feel, you know what? I have kids. I come to church. I'm entitled to be able to sit in the sanctuary while other people take care of my kids. But we forget and recognize it's not just about what you're entitled to, but what should you do with what you're entitled to? Because every week there are people who serve out in our parking lots. There are people who serve at our doors. There are people who give themselves, just like all the folks that are getting together this afternoon and going out and feeding the homeless with the Amistad homeless shelter in New Haven. There are people who are getting it. When we get in home, when we come together and 300 or 400 people show up for our serve days and people are willing to go out of their way, they're beginning to understand what a vertical church is about. Because it's not about what I'm entitled to. It's about what is God's will and how can I fulfill it? How can I use what I've been entitled to serve the needs of others? If you want to know something that has changed, Yes, as much as we believe in the importance of learning God's word, that is critical, but that's not an end in itself. It's that we learn to take what we have learned, what we have understood, and begin to minister to other people who need what we have learned, that understand what we've been entitled to have been a participant of. Now it needs to be leveraged, that the life of Christ is displayed in my life when I'm willing to give that back to help the lives of others, people who don't know as much as I, who haven't been here as long as I. But what? If we're content to be a people who eat and 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 just eat and eat and eat and eat and eat and eat, and it never translates into actually doing something to serve the needs of others, that the fullness of Him is that we grow up into Christ and that the whole body, fitly formed together, begin to serve the needs of one another so that the body grows through all the joints supply as it builds itself up in love. It's all of us understanding that what the dream of God has been and what a vertical church is that we would arise and actually begin to think about it in this respect, that we would fashion and form the true body of Jesus. In essence, guys, that we would understand all that God has entitled us to, and then decide how are we going to do, what are we going to do with it? How are we going to live that reality out? Because if we follow the life of Jesus, when he felt more entitled than any other person on this planet, what did he do? He put aside his opinions. He put aside all the rest of that stuff and began to serve the needs of others. Before we have an opinion and before we have an issue, the question is, are we actually emulating the life of Jesus? Before we're so concerned about all the rest of it, are we actually looking to say, Jesus, how can I serve you? You have served me so wonderful. You died for me. You gave your life for me. I would not be where I am today if you hadn't served me and loved me. And now how can I use that to serve the lives of other people? Guys, that's what a vertical church is. So listen to me. Let me end on this front. Listen. To accomplish what God has called us to do will require us to be generous in 3 specific areas. Generous. Because you see, a community of love operates. Jesus expressed how true love operates. That you turn around and are willing to lay aside every other thing and wrap a towel around yourself and find a way to serve the needs of others. Because a community of love cares for and takes care of one another. You see, and it will require us to be generous, because if we're going to do all God's called us to do, it will require us to be generous, number one, with this, our time. You see, all of us have been entitled to 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365 and a quarter days in the year. And when we turn around and realize what we've been entitled to and are willing to take a part of that time, to say, here am I, like Isaiah in the throne room, when God said, who will go from me? And he said, here am I, Lord, send me. When we're willing to give some of our time to be able to use to serve the needs of other people. Because how did families find baskets on Thanksgiving time this year? Because people were willing to serve the needs of others and come and out of their time, give their time to gather those together, to put those together and deliver them to people who are in need. How did coats get collected and distributed to the homeless? It's because people in this church got a hold of it and have given a part of their time and said, you know what? I'm going to use this time and I'm going to serve this passion to see this happen. And they give a portion of their time. The generosity of their time is one of the critical realities of making all that God has intended for us to do a reality. It's being generous with our time. Secondly, it's being generous with our talent. You see, our church vision understands that every single one of you are unique. every single one of you are precious. And every single one of you possess certain abilities and talents that if employed by Jesus for his kingdom will do things that other people are not able to do in the fashion God created you to do them. And when we begin to understand all that, maybe, just maybe, we begin to fashion a body. Because the last time I checked, I got a lot of different parts in my body. But I'm grateful that all those different parts operate in the fashion that they were created by God to do. And we will never be at our optimal. We will never possess the fullness of what God called us to do until all the precious parts, every single one of you listening to me today, recognizes that what God has entrusted to you, what God has put in you, is for such a time as this, that everyone is precious and valuable. And in that, we can form and fashion a body that your talents and abilities can be leveraged to build God's kingdom. That's the design, that's the plan, that's the dream of God. That's why we call it our dream team, that when people serve, whether in this place or outside these walls, we begin to embody the life of Jesus. And to do all that God's called us to do, we're going to have to be generous with our time. We're going to have to be generous with our talents. But third, last but not at all least, we need to be generous with our treasure. We need to be generous because you know why, guys? That's how God does what he does. You see, for us to be able to do things, you see, I've been faced with decisions even over this last week. I'm taking the responsibility of sending someone on our staff to be on the field to coordinate all these different volunteers that are going down into Sandy. And so that costs something of the church that I normally wouldn't have the expense to do. And the fact of the matter is, because of this is who we are, these are where the decisions lie. But since July 22nd of this year, I have faced a challenge in ministry that I've never faced. Because for the 8 years, come November 21st, 8 years, I will be the senior pastor at this church. And never had I had a period of time when we have been down economically for that long a period. Every single week below it. I haven't come and cried to you. I haven't said it. In all honesty, I've been on my face. I've sought God. Some of it is a bit personal in this end because I'm recognizing, are people saying, we're here, but we're not sure we're behind you, Pastor Ken. We're here, but we're not sure we want to go in that direction. We're not sure we want a vertical church. We're not sure because why? We're used to safety and comfort, where it was a lot easier just to come and get around all the Christian people and be so insulated from the world that we live in. This is challenging, and I get it. I understand, guys. My heart is I love every single one of you, but I know now more clearly than ever time that I've ever led that this is the direction of God. And so whether or not people support it in every regard, we are heading this way. I love you all. I would hope that you would understand because I see the possibilities of what God can do when people are willing to step out of their comfort zone and say, you know what? I can be who God called me to be because you know why? To be salt means that the only way it can fulfill its objective is it's got to get on what's corrupt before it can disinfect it, before it can heal it, before it can make it better. You can't just come. I got tired, guys, of just coming and meeting and praying for the lost and Sunday and going our way and thinking we had done something about it. No, we had to become intentional and go out of our way and say, you know what? It's time that we arise. It's time that we begin as Jesus came to seek and save that which is lost. We're going to exercise every level of intentionality to let every area, every person in this region know that they are welcome in this place, that we want them here. If they are far away from God, this is a place designed just for you. We don't want to just sit pretty in our little sheltered world thinking we're doing the will of God when God's heart gave everything to reach people far away from Him. And that's the passion that draws my heart heart. And if you say, and people don't say, what all this, name, and it's so silly at times, guys. I get it, I know. It means something to us. It's emotional, it's personal. I get that. I do, I understand that. But does that mean just because it's comfortable to us that we don't change? That's the reason we needed to change, because it comes that it can't be what's comfortable to us. It's about what is God saying? Who is God calling us to be? We need to be a God-centered church that says, God, we are not here for our purposes. We are here to be who you have called us to be. It's time that the church arise and shine and let Jesus be revealed in this region by people who care, by people who are willing to go out of the way. Because you know what, guys? That's what caused the early church, if you want to understand. A church of people, a group of people who didn't have nothing. But how did they take on and change the Roman world? It wasn't because they picketed and protested the Caesar. It wasn't because they tried to get involved in all this. They just went out and served the needs of others. The lasting impression that Jesus left is whatever you feel entitled to, now use that to serve the needs of others. So they served the needs by adopting children that nobody else wanted, by caring for the sick, by loving people who were estranged that nobody else cared about. The Christian community gained such a reputation that other people would say, you know what? I may not believe the way they believe. I may not understand all that Jesus stuff, but I'll tell you what, I certainly would like to work for one of them. I tell you what, I may not get into all that theology and stuff they're talking about, but I certainly would like my daughter to marry one of them. I actually wouldn't even mind working for one of them, because they take what they have to serve the needs of other people. They don't live selfishly. They live generously. They give their lives. They give their resources. They care about things that nobody else cares about. And in 300 years, the entire Roman Empire toppled to the truth of Christ. If the church would be bold enough in this hour to recognize where I'm calling us to go, that it's time to arise. It's time to get off of all of our bed of comfort and ease and say, you know what, God, I'm here for you. I want to do what you've called me to be. I want to embody the life of Jesus. And you know what, guys? The only way that's going to happen, why don't other churches sometimes do this? Because the challenge is this. It's going to require a large, life-giving church, because to do the things I'm talking to you about take a lot of resources to make happen. When you care about marginalized people, when you care about people who don't have other things, it is expensive. It costs. It is absolutely something that we have to take to heart. But I believe that's why God's called us to be who we are. That's what I believe our destiny and what this is all about. That's the vision I had in my heart so many years ago. And this is what it's all about. So yeah, there's a part of it. It is personal to me. I love everybody. I know that maybe some folks are saying, I don't know. I don't know if I can go with you there. And I will love you to the longest day that this earth is and into heaven. I'll never take that part personally. But there is a side of me that I've been challenged on this, and I say, you know what? This is the true challenge of leadership. Leadership is never a popularity contest. Leadership is about, this is where we're called to go. I invite all of you to follow. I invite all of you to come along. I invite all of you to see, because I see the potential. I see such precious people before me that there is so much more in you than maybe you have even realized to this day. And God can use such great things with it if we would just come together, if we would just unify and recognize that this is the call of the hour. This is the day that we live in. And this is who the church is called to be. That's what we are about. That's what this is all about. And I'm just going to challenge you on this end. But as we come into the last of this year, God gave the greatest gift to humanity that was embodied in his son, Jesus. Maybe you would just think about this end before we end out this year, because you're going to turn around and buy Christmas presents for all of your friends and family and people you love, and that's a great thing. Because love should be the most generous, most giving, most liberality thing that you do. But maybe, just maybe, you'd look back over the last number of months, and if by chance you hadn't been faithful, you say, Jesus, I'm going to give you a gift before the end of this year. Because you know what, guys? Just listen to my heart. This was the toughest week because my executive team and I caused my leadership team to be a part of the budgeting process of our church. For years, it's how they grow. It's how we do it. And we look at everything. And you know what? It's never been a year where I've had to look at how do you plan the next year with less. But you know what? I have a responsibility to honor the integrity of what I'm called to do, which means this: I'm not the federal government. We don't print money, okay? We make our decisions based on what we have. And therefore, we're looking at everything. What do we need to cut? What do we don't? And we've had to go through it, and it's been that way. I believe God will see us through. I believe we will have more than enough. But in the interim period, I've had to make the most difficult decisions, the hardest realities, because that's also what it means to lead. And the fact is, I just encourage you. You know what, guys? I've never, ever put pressure on you on this front. And you can turn and look at it, and if it doesn't deal with you, and if God's not speaking to you, then don't do anything with it at all. But the truth is, if you believe in where we're going, if you believe in what God's called us to do, if maybe, but maybe, you would just open your heart and say, what is a vertical church and what does this mean? Then maybe, just maybe, God would speak to you in a way to recognize what he's called us to do, what he's called us to be, and maybe, just maybe, we would take what we're entitled to and leverage it to serve the needs of others like we've never, ever done it